Picture a Roman bath in January somewhere in northern Britain 2,000 years ago. Outside, the ground is frozen. Inside, the floor is warm enough to walk on barefoot. No furnace in the room, no fire visible anywhere. Just warm stone radiating heat from below, hour after hour, fed by a single fire that was lit that morning. 7 energy systems like this one were engineered, perfected, and then quietly abandoned. The question worth asking is not how they worked, it is why we stopped using them. For nearly all of recorded human history, the entire global energy system ran on 6 inputs: muscle, wood, crop residue, dung, water, and wind. That was it. Around 1800, traditional biomass still dominated the global energy mix. Coal began its rise through the 1800s, and by the early 20th century, oil and gas were taking over. Today, oil, gas, and coal together supply roughly 80 to 82% of world primary energy. But here's the part that should bother you. Modern fossil systems waste nearly 2/3 of that energy as low-grade heat before it ever reaches you. The old systems had no transmission losses. They delivered heat directly where people lived using geometry and stone. System number 1, the Roman hypocaust and the Korean Ondol, 2 civilizations on opposite ends of the world, separated by centuries, arrived at nearly the same engineering answer. You light a fire outside the living space, route the combustion gases through channels under the floor, and let the stone do the rest. Roman hypocaust floors were raised on short brick pillars called pili, typically 30 to 80 centimeters tall, creating a plenum beneath the entire floor. Hot gases flowed through that space, up through hollow wall flues called tubuli, and out a chimney. The floor above became one massive radiant panel. The Korean Ondol took the same principle and made it domestic. A slightly sloped underfloor flue ran from the kitchen hearth beneath the entire living area and out a chimney on the far side of the house. Every meal cooked was also a heating event. Every BTU of waste heat from dinner was pulled directly under the floor where the family slept. The thick masonry floor then stored that heat and radiated it for hours after the fire went cold. Ondol systems remained in common use in rural Korea well into the 20th century, not because Koreans lacked alternatives, but because the system genuinely worked. This is not fringe theory. This is documented engineering. System number 2, the Kang Bed-Stove of northern China. If the Ondol heats a whole room, the Kang focuses that same logic onto a single sleeping platform and does it with almost no fuel. A raised masonry platform, typically about 60 to 90 centimeters high and large enough for the whole family to sleep on, was built with internal flue channels. The cooking fire in the adjacent stove pushed hot gases through those channels before exhausting outside. The platform absorbed the heat, held it through the night, and the family slept directly on the warm surface. In regions where winter temperatures drop well below freezing, this system kept people alive on a fraction of the wood conventional fire would require. System number 3, the Russian and European masonry mass stove. This one was engineered with a sophistication that still impresses anyone who looks at the flue path carefully. A standard masonry stove, whether you call it a Russian peck, a Finnish contraflow stove, or a German Kachelofen, routes combustion gases through a long, winding internal channel before they exit the chimney. That path might be 2 to 4 meters of internal travel inside a single stove body. By the time the gases exhaust, they have given up most of their heat to the masonry. You fire the stove once or twice a day, burn a hot, fast fire for 1 to 2 hours, and the thermal mass radiates steady heat for 12 to 24 hours after the fire is completely out. The physics behind this is worth understanding because it is the same reason a modern cast iron wood stove is actually less efficient for heating a space over time. A thin metal stove heats fast and cools fast. It cycles. You're constantly feeding it. A masonry stove with 500 to 800 kilograms of brick and mortar acts as a thermal battery. You charge it with a hot fire and it discharges slowly and evenly for the rest of the day. Scandinavian and Russian peasants who could afford very little wood survived brutal winters because they understood this principle intuitively, even if they never wrote down the physics. They solved this centuries ago. The question is why we forgot. System number 4, wind-powered grain milling and water pumping. This one feels obvious until you look at the actual scale. At the peak of windmill use in the Netherlands in the early 1800s, there were roughly 10,000 windmills operating across the country. They were not quaint decorations, they were the industrial infrastructure of a nation. Draining polders, sawing timber, grinding grain, pressing oil, making paper. A large Dutch smock mill could generate 20 to 30 horsepower in a good wind. These were not backup systems. They were the primary mechanical power source for an entire economy, and they ran on zero fuel. What killed the windmill was not that it stopped working, it was that coal-powered steam engines could run regardless of wind speed at any hour in any location. The windmill had one fatal flaw by industrial standards: intermittency. You could not schedule production around it, but for a homestead, a farm, or a small rural community, intermittency is not a fatal flaw. It is a manageable constraint. The medieval and early modern engineers who built these mills understood that you design your workflow around the energy source you have, not the other way around. That is a principle worth carrying forward. System number 5, tidal mills. These are genuinely underappreciated. A tidal mill uses the predictable rise and fall of ocean tides to fill a mill pond at high tide, then releases that stored water through a mill wheel at low tide. The power source is the gravitational relationship between the Earth and the Moon, which means the schedule never changes and the fuel never runs out. Tidal mills were operating in Europe as early as the 6th and 7th centuries CE. By the 11th century, the Domesday Book recorded tidal mills operating along the English coast. Some sites in Brittany and Ireland operated continuously for over 800 years before finally going silent in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The engineering constraint of a tidal mill is that the operating window shifts by roughly 50 minutes every day, tracking the lunar cycle. Millers who worked these sites did not fight that schedule. They built their entire workflow around it, milling when the tide allowed and resting when it did not. The mill pond itself was the energy storage system, a reservoir of gravitational potential energy filled for free twice a day. Before we write it off as primitive, let us look at what actually survived. Some of these structures ran continuously for centuries. The Ealing Tide Mill in Hampshire, England, has documented milling operations going back to the Domesday Survey of 1086. System number 6, the ice harvest and natural cold storage. Before mechanical refrigeration, entire industries were built around harvesting, storing, and distributing naturally occurring ice. In the 19th century, the American ice trade was a global commercial enterprise. Ice cut from frozen New England ponds in January was packed in sawdust, loaded onto ships, and delivered to destinations as far as India and South America, arriving largely intact months later. The insulation system was simple: thick sawdust or straw packed tightly around dense blocks of ice in a well-designed ice house with good drainage. The physics of latent heat did the rest. The ice house itself is a masterclass in passive thermal management. A well-built 19th century ice house was partially or fully buried in the ground, taking advantage of the Earth's stable temperature below the frost line. Walls were thick, often double-walled with an insulating air gap or packed sawdust fill. The roof had a ventilation gap at the ridge to allow warm air to escape without letting warm air in. Ice stored in a properly designed ice house in a temperate climate could last from January through September with losses of only 10 to 20%. That is a passive refrigeration system with no moving parts and no energy input after the initial harvest. System number 7, the Persian Windcatcher or bad gear. This is arguably the most elegant passive cooling system ever built, and it was doing reliable work in desert climates for over 1,000 years before modern air conditioning existed. A badger is a tall tower built above a building with openings oriented to catch prevailing winds and direct them downward into the living space below. In many designs, the air shaft passed near or over a qanat, an underground water channel, so the incoming air was both cooled and humidified before entering the room. In cities like Yazd in central Iran, bad gears kept interior temperatures 10 to 15 degrees Celsius below the outdoor air temperature during the hottest part of the day. The qanat system that fed cooling air to the bad gear was itself a remarkable piece of hydraulic engineering. Underground aqueducts, some stretching 50 kilometers or more, carried water from mountain aquifers into desert cities entirely by gravity with no pumps. The combination of the qanat and the bad gear gave Persian cities running water and passive air conditioning simultaneously powered by nothing but gravity and wind. Some qanat systems in Iran are still actively used today after more than 2,000 years of continuous operation. The old ways worked for a reason. Let me show you why that reason is still valid. So why did all of these systems disappear or nearly disappear? The honest answer is that they did not all disappear for the same reason. Some were displaced by cheaper industrial alternatives. Some were regulated out of existence by building codes written around centralized utility infrastructure. Some were simply forgotten when the skilled tradespeople who built and maintained them died without passing on the knowledge. History did not lose this knowledge by accident. It was replaced deliberately, one code revision and one utility connection at a time, and the replacement was sold as an upgrade even when the underlying engineering was a step backward. What connects all 7 of these systems is a single engineering philosophy. Deliver usable energy directly where people need it, using the simplest possible conversion path, and store whatever you cannot use immediately in thermal mass, water, or ice. No long-distance transmission, no multi-step conversion losses, no fuel bill. The modern energy system does the opposite. It converts fuel to steam, steam to electricity, electricity to resistance heat, and throws away nearly 2/3 of the original energy along the way. These old systems were not perfect, but they were honest about where energy came from and what it cost to move it. That honesty is worth recovering. If you are a homeowner with land and a skilled pair of hands, none of this is purely academic. A masonry mass stove can be built with locally sourced brick and fire clay mortar. A properly designed root cellar or ice house can extend food storage by months without a single watt of electricity. A small tidal or run-of-river mill is still a viable mechanical power source for the right property. These systems do not require a grid connection, a fuel delivery, or a manufacturer's warranty. They require understanding the underlying principle well enough to build and maintain them yourself. That is exactly what this channel is here to help you do. If this is the kind of content you want more of, the subscribe button is right there and it costs you nothing. Every week on this channel, we go back into the archives, pull out a system or a technique that actually worked, and break down the engineering so you can understand it well enough to use it. Next up, we are going into the specific construction details of the masonry mass stove, including flue path geometry, thermal mass calculations, and the mistakes that most first-time builders make. That one is worth sticking around for. I will see you in it.